Hi there, I'm David Hunt, owner of Game Masters Guild, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of The Art of the Master. In this episode, I'm going to look at more unique places to adventure. Now, the last time I had a video about unique places to adventure, I talked about adventuring on the high seas, and then I went underground with it, so you could have vast underdark seas. Well, this time, I'm actually going to look at airship travel real briefly. So, let's take a look at unique places to adventure. Airships. So, an adventure with airships has many similar connections as if you were sailing on the open sea. You can go to different ports, but except this time you can sail across the land, which really opens up the field for the players for adventuring. Not only can you set sail for any island, but you can set sail for any inland place as well, especially very hard to reach places. And this really opens up, I think, a lot of unique avenues of adventure. Not only that, but all those flying miniatures that are just gathering dust in your collection, well, now you've got really good reason to use them. But now, let's look at some kind of odd things you could do with this. You could have a vast city in the sky powered by fire elementals constantly keeping dozens, if not hundreds, of massive hot air balloons afloat. Or maybe the city itself is powered by some magic that keeps it magically aloft. So you literally have an island in the sky instead of just on the ocean. So this could be very interesting, especially if the players find, let's say, a map that shows islands on the map, but it doesn't exactly show that they're in the air. And these islands could be very high in the air. So high that even with the sun passing over them, they would barely even cast a shadow on the ocean below. And on a cloudy day or a hazy day, you're never even going to notice these. And you might not normally notice these islands in the sky if they're high enough. You might think, oh, what's that little speck? Oh, must be just a distant cloud somewhere. And unless you're really paying attention to it, you might not even realize what it is. And that could really infuriate some players if they're sailing the open ocean conventionally and they're looking at a map and they're like, why can't we find this island? We know we're in the right spot. So that's kind of interesting, something to keep in mind for future use. I know I certainly will be. Now, another thing that I'm going to suggest is very similar to what I suggested in my other Unique Places video. But instead of regular ships, you could have other airships that could band together, much like the ocean vessels, to create villages or whole cities in the sky for safety or privacy. And you could have these vast rope bridges that could connect each of these vessels together. I suppose the logistics of it is a little more complicated, but then again, it is a fantasy setting. What does it really matter? And you might ask, well, how do all these bridges get connected between the two? Well, they're rope bridges, and you could throw a line to someone else. Then you roll down your bridge and let it just fall off the side of your vessel. Part of it's hooked to your vessel. You let the other side fall down, and the other vessel takes the rope you shot over and pulls up your rope bridge and connects the two. And who knows? This might be kind of a commonplace thing where rope bridges actually have little hooks on the end of it, and most airships would have little eyelets. So as you come to dock next to another ship with a rope bridge, you get higher than the other airship, you lower your rope bridge, and the end that dangles down to the other ship you want to hook to, that crew extends large pole arms with hooks to hook the bridge, pull it over, and hook it to their vessel, and then you level off, and then you both are roughly the same altitude, and then you've got the rope bridge connecting the two. So you could hook many ships, or just one or two. Now, of course, there is a lot of problems. Of course, what about storms, or what if someone's not paying attention at the wheel? So there is a lot of problems with this, which could be a lot of sources for adventure. And of course, these kind of things would be ripe pickings for all sorts of flying creatures, such as dragons, wyverns, well, heck, even other air pirates. So there's a lot of things to consider, but the fantasy is definitely there, and it's definitely very cool, very unique. Another thing that'd be really cool is you could have vast mountaintop outposts and or enclaves that could be visited by airships. Of course, there's a reason why they're going to be there. They may be more extreme in their views or have a desire to do what they want to do beyond the reach of normal people, such as a king's laws or laws of a certain country. Perhaps magic is outlawed, so they have their own private place here, or religious persecution, etc., so on and so forth. There's a lot of different reasons, especially criminal enterprise. That's a whole nother reason altogether, and is a very common reason at that. You could have, it could be something as simple as men of magic who just don't want to be persecuted for happening to like knowing magic and researching it, but you could have the other aspect of it where it could be more nefarious wizards and sorcerers conducting magical experimentations, or maybe even necromantic spells that might otherwise be frowned upon and actively destroyed on the mainland. Or even, oddly enough, just normal scholarly pursuits. Perhaps, high up in the mountains for starters, you'd probably get a clear view of the nighttime sky, so those who are interested in astronomy would be very interested in coming up here and setting up shop for a little while. Perhaps the pursuit of certain kinds of knowledge are forbidden in the lands that scholars are in, so they travel to this mysterious mountain outpost where they could exchange freely ideas. And this is something that has regularly occurred through our history, maybe not necessarily on mountaintops, but the persecution of ideas and science, and that maybe these scholars can find a safe place to go so they can exchange these ideas. And of course, as always, these places could simply be places for the ultra-rich to go. Ultra-expensive, maybe they have the finest and most unique wines and foods, things that are extraordinarily hard to get otherwise. Imagine having a room on a mountaintop with a view of an entire mountain range, like 5, 10, or even 20,000 feet or more above the Earth's surface. And when we have money, and we have a lot of money, especially when we talk about ultra-rich, be it fantasy or nowadays, the more over the top, the more you're willing to spend the money. And here, the ultra-rich could make even Xanathar feel like a hobo. You could have exotic hang gliding amongst the mountaintops. Now, you got to remember, these mountaintops, they're going to be pretty cold, so you're going to have to dress warmly or have some kind of magic to protect you. But then again, that's a service that could be provided. Or you could even have whole groups of wizards that, for a certain amount of money, they would cast spells on you to allow you to fly just as you are and to protect you from the elements. And off you go. There's rock climbing. You could relax in exotic hot springs 10,000 feet up on the side of the mountain, and who knows what other wonders could await you in one of these mountaintop enclaves. Perhaps even traveling to other worlds, planes, or dimensions. Now, areas where you could cross over to the different planes, this would be a nice place to have these things, because then they're out of reach of normal men and normal powers that be, so that way perhaps more unsavory characters could come and go in Faerun or any world that you have and do their trading and either exotic or illicit activities beyond the reach of most normal people. Someone's not going to see what's happening, go back home, get a whole ton of people together, and they're going to come with pitchforks and torches to burn down everything you've carefully crafted over the last few years. So this mountaintop enclave is really just ripe for the picking and ripe for the DM to go crazy with his imagination. Players got too much gold, here they won't have enough. Every floor, cut marble tiles. Who knows, maybe the floor is just, it's marble because it's carved straight into the marble mountainside, maybe, I don't know. And just think of how much these ultra-rich enclaves could spend. It would be ridiculous the kind of luxuries that would be available, much less just walking around. It would just be amazing. So this is definitely something to consider. Now, going back to what I said earlier about possibly airships being attacked by dragons or wyverns, you always want to be aware of these kind of dangers. And of course, if your players have airships or they're traveling on airships, maybe not their own, but airships that are run by other kingdoms or independent individuals, air pirates are always going to be a problem. Not to mention dragons, because an airship like that just floating in the sky, people traveling on it, man, if I was a dragon, I'd go after something like that. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, of course, players shouldn't be afraid to use an airship just because they think the DM's going to throw a dragon at them every single time. But occasionally, once in a while, you should definitely shake it up and definitely have maybe a wormling or a young dragon maybe attack the players, or maybe even not be so bold to attack the players, but maybe negotiate with them a little bit to see if he can't threaten them out of some gold for flying through his space. It's hard to say. There's a lot of different angles you could take with it. Maybe Aarakocra, you're flying through their airspace, and if they were to get off course and get into, say, a hurricane, they could easily be blown into maybe the plane of air without them even knowing. So there's something else to consider. And that brings me to the environment itself being a hazard. Now, it wouldn't be nothing to fall from your airship and, of course, fall to your death. And if there's combat happening on the decks, that increases the odds of something happening immensely. You could easily have high winds that could suddenly gust through your vessel, and not only could you get blown overboard, but it could shake the vessel just as much as a regular sailing vessel would be shaken by winds and waves on the ocean's surface. You could easily be dashed against mountainsides or simply torn to shreds by the wind, even without getting slammed in, even without slamming into anything or having anything hit your airship. Winds crisscrossing and throwing your airship up and down could easily strain ropes, the air bladder, the ship itself, and it could literally break apart in midair. Now, of course, you might say, wait, Dave, but it's magic. Well, it really depends on the kind of game you're running. See, for me, in most of my games, my airships would be propelled by a type of magic, but not necessarily held aloft exclusively by magic. And of course, it depends on the game and the game system. It really just depends on what you're trying to do. But of course, do what suits you the best. But of course, for me, I like to try to put as much enjoyment and risk into it at the same time. So if the player's going to take an airship, it might be powered by something magical to allow for continual hot air to be blown up in the air bladder, but it's not just a magic force field of flying that allows them just to go. There's got to be a little more, for me, a little bit more extra element of danger, and I think that kind of does it, actually. I really do like it. Now, something else to consider is, of course, the cold itself. The higher you get, it's going to get cold, and that could present a problem for the players. Usually, I'm not too worried about altitude. Some things I just don't worry about in a fantasy game. I would probably more worry about it in more of a modern setting kind of game. But in fantasy, it's just fantasy. I don't know. It just, depending on the game, I just feel different about doing certain things. But the cold is definitely something to consider, especially when their airship is sailing over tall mountain ranges or just the North or South Pole. Now, another thing is the altitude, because the higher you get, the less breathable air you have. Now, this could be a problem for some of these mountain enclaves. Well, if these mountain enclaves have few entrances, or at the very least they try to take care to kind of shutter their entrances, and perhaps they have a large amount of plant life inside, or some magic that helps kind of hold back the thin atmosphere or to provide extra atmosphere, extra oxygen, well, then maybe that might not be so bad. Perhaps, again, you could have vast greenhouses, I suppose. And how would you do a greenhouse in a mountain? I don't know. I'd probably take a section of mountain and cut the side off and put large glass, or maybe to look really cool, to have massive stained glass and the sun come through and be light for the plants, or maybe a series of mirrors to bounce the sunlight in. Does it sound fantastic? Does it sound like it wouldn't work? It doesn't really matter. It's make-believe, it's fantasy, it's whatever you think you can get away with. In my games, if I take enough time to describe it and treat it as realistically as possible, eventually my players will suspend their disbelief enough to buy it. And if they don't, well, sometimes I might just have to come up with something else. But again, it's whatever you want. But I definitely think some of these things, these spectacles, make it, even though a lot of them are unbelievable, like maybe, like I said, this mountainside greenhouse with either gigantic stained glass. I'm not talking just a little bit. I'm talking, 100 feet high and 400 feet wide on the side of a mountain, and of glass or stained glass, or maybe mirrors, great mirrors reflecting all the light from smaller little boreholes throughout the mountain into one gigantic chamber the size of a football stadium that makes it seem like a small jungle in there. This is where you're getting all your oxygen, and they're growing food for the mountain, for the cooks and everything, for everybody to eat. So it's, fantasy isn't necessarily about the believability, even though it's fun to have believability in your games, but a lot of times fantasy is the spectacle, it's the adventure, going someplace you've never been before. And I think that the adventure is more important than the realism. And there's plenty of time for realism in a fantasy game, or any role-playing game for that matter. But again, remember, your players, they want to go exotic places. They want to do amazing things. They want to be a part of that. When they watch movies and TVs and they sit down at a role-playing game, they want to do what they've seen on TV. Maybe not exactly, but they want to have that experience of awe and wonder. And you, as the dungeon master or game master, can give it to them. Push aside believability a little bit. Be consistent. Try to figure out a way where it seems logical, even though it might not really work. Something else that I always thought was kind of cool is, in the past I've seen artwork where you have clouds and you'll see a castle up in the clouds, or like a palm tree sitting there, and it just kind of defies logic. But, in a fantasy setting, that could be kind of cool too. Is it magic? Is it just how the world works? It's hard to say. But I could almost imagine that over time, that maybe somehow through magic and through dust being aloft in the air, that clouds literally become islands in the sky. Certain clouds over generations could literally become almost solid enough to be this, and I say almost solid for a reason, to be this floating cloud in the sky, this floating island, in the sky. So you could, by the nature of the cloud, you could legitimately fly up, either by magic or on an airship, and actually land on this island in the sky and actually walk around. And I could almost see that these islands in the sky would be very hard to see because they just slowly move around with other clouds. And from underneath, you wouldn't hardly be able to see it. Or for 1 second, you might think you see a village or a castle or a tree, but you got to remember, the clouds are way up there. You might see a little speck of green or something, but only around the edges of the cloud, and the cloud is constantly shifting, and there might be other clouds, or a little weak part of it breaks off and blocks your view. So you're not always going to see these things, and you're not always looking up. And if you can see the edge of the cloud, you might be so far away you might not be able to see these details. And if you're directly beneath it, you definitely might not be able to see it. You're definitely not going to be able to see any of these details. And when your players land on this cloud island, this island in the clouds, just think it could be a light, thick fog that covers the ground, or maybe just a general haze that kind of is everywhere. But of course, there's going to be wind, so sometimes it'll clear and then it'll be foggy again, depending on what's happening. And there also is a danger. If you're careless, you get too close to the edge, because the ground, because it is a cloud still, the closer you get to the ground that you're walking on the cloud, the thicker the cloud is. So you might reach down and there's grass and trees and stuff, and you might reach down and feel it, but the fog is so thick at ground level, unless you really wave your hand a lot, do a lot of work to try to move the cloud away from the ground, you're not going to actually be able to see the soil. You're only going to be able to see kind of some things that are growing up out of it. And it's possible you could walk around and you could see the edge of this cloud island about 50 feet away, but actually the edge is much closer to you because the ground, the cloud ground, if you will, is much thinner and you could fall right through. Maybe, alternatively, perhaps, and you probably roll randomly for this, it's probably a real low chance, but because the nature of the cloud is constantly shifting and changing, perhaps the ground would occasionally open up beneath the players. So they could be standing there 1 minute, and somebody could fall through to their death. It's kind of anticlimactic, but imagine if they're just walking, and then all of a sudden they see a tree, they hear a noise, and it's roots snapping, and the tree is leaning away from other trees, so it's hitting other branches, and then suddenly it goes straight down into the ground, and they go over to investigate, and they see a tree falling as they're looking through a hole of this island cloud that's thousands of feet in the air. And then slowly the hole slowly starts to repair itself. But of course, if they were to try to hop on it immediately after the cloud repairs itself, they're going to fall through because it takes a long time for it to get solid again. And I would imagine in areas where there's thicker foliage or maybe structures that perhaps for whatever reason, I can't explain it, maybe magic, who knows, that the more structures you have in one spot or the more plant life you have in one spot, the less likely it is to happen. Or if the cloud does kind of disintegrate away temporarily underneath part of the castle, the whole thing's not going to fall in. And then eventually it repairs itself and you're fine. But of course, over hundreds of years, that could seriously undermine a certain section of this island in the clouds or a castle that's built there, to where eventually maybe part of the castle does fall through, or maybe there's ruins because of that. The castle hasn't fallen through the cloud completely, but it has been, over generations, it's fallen to ruin because the ground is unstable there. And imagine if your players are just walking around, perhaps let's say sessions before they actually encounter this cloud island, and maybe they're fighting a group of orcs or something, and there's an ogre with them, and suddenly this giant stone block, like 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet, just falls on an ogre out of the clear blue sky. And of course, the orcs run off because it happens, and the player's like, where did that come from? They have no idea. And then many sessions later, they find this island in the sky. And again, on the island in the cloud, you could do this maybe once or twice a day or whenever it seems appropriate. You shouldn't torment the players with it, although some DMs probably would. But I think it'd be like a dex save, a DC 5, and if they fail, you grant them a second chance DC save, and maybe other guys could help, stuff like that. But it'd be a little more difficult, like a DC 15, to catch yourself. And of course, again, you're going to want to elaborate on these dangers before you have players making saving throws to protect themselves. It really depends on the presentation. The players need to know the danger before they take the risk. Because I don't think blindly surprising players with unusual situations is as fun as a lot of people think it is. I like the build up, like, hey, this is dangerous. I'm just letting you know. Hey, I'm telling you one more time, this is dangerous. Hey, you just seen something happen to confirm your suspicions. This is really dangerous. Then the players are fully invested, and then they keep going, and then you can start hitting them with these DC saves occasionally and stuff like that. And you can make it very, very dramatic, even though they're going to pretty much probably make it because they got their party members, even if they fail. They got all sorts of magic and rope and stuff like that and unusual abilities and powers. They'll probably be okay, but you can definitely play up the tension for sure, especially if you work on your descriptive skills. Something else that could be interesting, other than just trees falling straight through, maybe a large rock disappears or a pond they're sitting at just hanging out, it suddenly starts draining away. An animal could fall through, an enemy they're fighting could suddenly disappear just like that. And now that I think about it, even if you have players making a saving throw and they're well aware of it and they're having a pretty easy time, I mean, sooner or later someone's going to tank it and someone's going to fall through. And every now and then you could always say, well, this place, there doesn't seem to be a lot of growth here, so you know the ground's going to be pretty unstable. So it's possible that if you go to fall through, it could be very unexpected and the DC might be a little higher to go through this area. And they might go through, and even still, players, it seems, especially in my game, are always pretty good at making saving throws, it seems like, no matter how dangerous I seem to make it. But if, in this kind of instance, if they're exploring this island in the clouds, if they all make their saving throws, I think it'd be best if something else just randomly falls through the cloud, just to let them know that, hey, it's still a possibility. So if all the players make their saving throws, have that rock over there fall through the clouds, you know, or maybe they got a horse they're pulling along with them. Their horse falls through the clouds. There's all sorts of possibilities you could do. It's just really interesting stuff to keep in mind, especially if there's a battle. Now, if there's a battle, you need to be rolling for all your NPCs as well, because if you're doing it to the players, you got to do it to the NPCs and vice versa. It's only fair, and it might cut the players some slack too. And who knows, if it's bad enough, you know, player starts to fall through a cloud, an enemy NPC falls through the cloud. Someone's like, hey, let's all stop. You know, we'll get our guy if you get your guy, and we'll talk about it. You know, who knows? There's all sorts of potential role-playing opportunities for this kind of thing. And wouldn't it be nice if players were fighting a really big, like the classic giant in the clouds? They're fighting a giant. He fails his save, and he falls through, and the player's like, whew, oh, that was easy. We were going to get hosed if he hadn't fallen through that hole in the cloud. Woo! Well, wouldn't that be nice? That'd be a lucky save right there. And another thing that I thought, when I was writing this up, another thing that I thought that was kind of a cool last-minute thing was the island, or the cloud island, or whatever you want to call it, the island in the cloud, could easily go through a storm phase. So the ground could easily become covered in several inches or even more of water. So the cloud, you know, it's going to be raining, it's going to be storming, and sure, the cloud's going to be emitting all this stuff, but also, too, maybe the top of the cloud itself, maybe it fills up with water, so it kind of floods. So water cascades over the sides, it comes out of the bottom of the cloud, it does all sorts of stuff. Maybe you see trees kind of weaken and lean a little bit because water's going through, maybe a structure kind of leans a little bit, or you can hear unusual noises that indicate that, you know, maybe part of the structure might fall away, or maybe it does. So the water would literally issue up from the cloud itself. So suddenly, where there wasn't any, you could be walking through inches of water. Maybe even in some places, it wouldn't be the whole thing, but in certain places, probably more towards the center of this island in the clouds, you could literally be fighting in waist-high water. And you could have small streams and stuff under normal conditions, but you could literally have a flash flood on top of this cloud. How weird is that? I mean, it's just bizarre. If you just really stop and think about it, there's some bizarre stuff going on there. It would be really cool. And nothing says it has to be flat. You could have like small mountains and hills and stuff, and it could be crazy. And especially, what if there's another cloud on top of overhead of your cloud, and it starts raining, and it's a cascade effect, and that cloud starts, you know, it's part of the whole storm cell, and that cloud starts doing the same thing. And that hasn't even brought me, and I haven't gotten to the lightning part yet. Lightning could literally shoot from another cloud to where they're at, or could literally shoot up from the ground in all directions where they're at. Thunder could be deafening. It could be just happen right there. Maybe they're walking along and they hear that rumbling sound in the distance. Oh, sounds like a storm. And then suddenly, right where they're standing, just thunder just goes off. Lightning just happens. There's all sorts of cool things you could do. You want to go easy probably on how much damage they take, but it should definitely be, I would rather go for happening more often with less damage, striking more players. A lightning bolt goes this way, strikes you guys for 3 points for you, 2 points for you. You know, they all got like 20 hit points each, let's say. But just work them over several times instead of one bolt, totally killing 1 or 2 players. And then that way you could kind of dog them while they're running for cover. Any kind of thunderbolt, thunderclap, you could look up the spell and you could easily impart those penalties to the players if they don't make the proper saves. Or maybe they can't save because they're right on the epicenter. It just all depends on what you want to do. And there's always a possibility where perhaps the cloud goes through a certain phase where it just becomes, maybe it's building itself up, or maybe part of it's going away, so it becomes more cloudy for a little while. Or another cloud could come from another area and literally float right over this cloud island, creating a thick fog, or even erratic winds could blow through. Or since they're on this cloud island, they're not going to have any sense of exactly where they're going unless they're carefully looking at their charts and figuring out where the island's actually going. Or they disembark, someone disembarks on the airship or flies out and kind of keeps track, but they could easily get swept up in a hurricane or some other kind of storm system. And why couldn't you have this massive tornado or sea spout happen and literally come right up through the island? Or why couldn't you just have it occur right on the island in the clouds? There's all sorts of really cool stuff you could do. And it just I like the challenge of doing something different. That's why I like running one-shots a lot of times in my stores, because it allows me to focus for a limited time on a certain idea that really won't matter because the players are coming, having a limited adventure. It's not part of a connected campaign. And you get to try something new. The players get to experience something new, but it's not something that screws up a campaign because there's no associated campaign. And that's why I think it's always cool for players and their game master, dungeon master. That's why I think it's always cool to occasionally say, hey, you know what, tonight instead of the regular game, I got some pre-generated characters. Or you just hand out some NPC cards and say, we're going to play, I got a one-shot I want to do just for tonight, just to do something different, totally off the rails, so that way I can try something new, you guys can experience something new, but it's not going to screw up our current game. And of course, a lot of players, a lot of DMs are going to balk at this and say, no, we got to play our game, we must play our game, and we don't want to screw it up. But you know what? I can't tell you how many one-shots I've played with my regular guys. And a lot of times, it seems like they're the ones that bring it up more often than not. Like my buddy, because amongst us, there's probably about a third of us actually run the games. And, my buddy James or Glenn, they'll sit there and, hey, man, I got a one-shot I want to try it on you guys tonight. If everybody's cool with it. If you don't want to try it, you can either just sit and watch, or and if you feel like you want to get in it, here's a character. Or if you just, if you don't want to try it, then you can just sit out. It's no big deal. And some guys, they're not in for one-shots. They want to play their character, their game. And they're like, well, that's cool. I'll just do something else that night. Or they'll come watch and decide they want to get in on it. But I definitely think it's worth it because it expands your possibilities. It expands your mind. And it really kind of works the creative muscle of your mind, especially when you're the dungeon master. So, and I think game masters would do well to occasionally run a one-shot, especially when maybe their normal group can't make it, or just casually say once a month, in addition to your regular game, you say, anyone who can make it, I want to do a one-shot. You have a few extra characters made in case a bunch of people can show up, but just do a one-shot. Do something different, because I think you'll be better for it, and it'll really get you thinking creatively. Something that's helped me is I have actually, especially in one-shots, I've really pushed myself, and I've encouraged people to split up and not to their detriment. Say, well, maybe you should go this way because it will be quicker. Now I'll tell them the con too, that say, if you get in trouble, you might not be able to get out of it, but there's pros and cons to everything. And I do encourage my players to split sometimes, because it's not for me to be devious, is why I'm trying to get them to split up. It's for me to exercise my creative ability and my ability as a game master. You've got to try different skills if you want to improve your game, if you want to have fun. And you might be having just as much fun as you've ever had without doing anything extra that I've ever said, which is cool. That's fine. It's your game. You do what you want. Don't let anybody tell you what to do with your game. But if you're looking for something different, if you're looking to stretch your creative muscles, try it. Once isn't going to kill you. It's not going to throw things crazy, and especially as a one-shot. If you did a one-shot once a month in addition to your normal game, even if you play every week, that's really not going to throw you, because at most you're going to have, 2 or 3 extra players, and the fewer players you have, the easier it is to run the one-shot, and the more you get to test some of these ideas. And especially if you've got players who are really interested in this kind of stuff, they might say, well, that is kind of a cool idea, taking an airship and going to this island in the clouds, even though we're not doing anything even remotely like that in our current game. Let's check it out. And by you trying different things that you might not normally be comfortable with, you might find out that you really like some of these different things. And it might inspire you to maybe not do that, but to do something equally unusual or bizarre. You might, snap your fingers and go, oh my God, I just had an idea. It's not an airship thing, but this whole thing it sparked my imagination for something else. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help you spark your imagination so you can have even more awesome games with your players and make really great memories, and so everybody can have a really great time. Oh, man, I really get into this stuff, and I love it so much. And I really, really hope that you've gathered something from these videos. And at the very least, hopefully you've been entertained for 30, 40 minutes, however long each of these videos ends up being. But I really hope that you do become inspired by some of my ideas to try some of this unique stuff. And to say, hey, why not? Heck, try a different genre, for that one shot, try a different genre. Maybe your players are astronauts, and their space capsule lands, and when no one comes to pick them up, they get out, they start walking around, they realize they're on an island, and then the more they start walking, they realize they're on an island in the clouds. And then who knows whatever crazy adventures they could have. Maybe suddenly becomes a fantasy adventure, except they're astronauts, Who knows? Try something off the wall. Mash genres together and just, have some fun, do something different. Even if you don't like it, at least you did a one-shot and you said, hey, that was silly as all get out. We're never doing that. But you might be inspired to do something else because of it. You might not use that exact idea, but you still might be like, oh my gosh, I just had an epiphany and I know what I'm going to do. I'm inspired. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm trying to inspire you to play your favorite role-playing games and have you guys have a great time, you and your friends all together playing great games and having a wonderful time. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to inspire you. Well, thank you very much for listening. I super appreciate it. And I guess I'm going to let you go. I'm David Hunt, owner of Game Masters Guild, telling you to stay safe, play great games, and I'll see you real soon.